Hi everyone, I'm David Looms. This is the first time I've actually appeared in front of the camera because this is the first time since the refurbishment of my garage that I've made one of these videos. So finally there's enough room for me to do that, so welcome. What I want to do today is answer a few questions that I've had. A lot of people have been asking about the interesting little vise I have in my milling machine. It's Flux Workholding make the device. And I'm going to take it off the table just now anyway because I'm going to make a base plate that's big enough for a pair of them. So now is a good time as any to show you what's involved in the little thing. Right, that's a slightly more conventional camera angle for me. Let me zoom in on this vise, see if you can get an idea of what's going on there. It's sitting on the table of my 440. It's currently set up in its dual station configuration. So we have a centre jaw here that's fixed and two sliding jaws front and back, with a common screw in the middle to tighten them up. The whole jaw is aluminium on a steel base, not just a facing, which is what you normally get with a soft jaw vise. That makes this thing look much more like a small pallet system. Anyway, I'll take it off the table now and then we'll go over to the bench and you can see how it's put together. Right then, I've got my vise off of the mill and off of its base plate so you can see what you actually get. The base part, this is quite interesting, it's not cast iron as you get in most vises, it's steel. You can see some milling marks on it, but I gather it's hand lapped to get it flat, and as far as I can measure, well, it's flat. Lovely piece of engineering. The most interesting thing about it is these features you can see here, and these are really the secret of the Flux vise. Each of the soft jaws, the fixed part of the soft jaw is fitted with a pair of these things. These are 0.5 millimeter spheres, very accurate, and they have, can't see it in the camera, it's quite hard to see even in person, but underneath here there is a simple straight taper which allows them to locate properly when you tighten the screw up. Now the idea here, if I tip this up, this is the locking position for the rear fixed jaw rather, in a single station application. This ends up sitting in here. Now at this point it's loose, but these two dowels here, these are fixed, and as you just very lightly tighten up the screw there, okay, this one here pushes forward and causes this sphere to centre between the two dowels. So that gives you very accurate location from side to side. At the same time, there's a second one at the other side which comes into this slot here, and when you do the same on it, it's only got a single locating point. So what that does is it fixes the jaw's tendency to rotate like that, and between the two of them what you get is a very, very accurate realignment of the fixed jaw every time you fit it. That's a big contrast to most vise systems where soft jaws or hard jaws simply go on to the fixed part of the vise with a pair of screws and can move about quite a lot from time to time. So what I have here, this is what one of the jaws looks like. This is 3" by 3", so it's part of a pair to be used in the single station case. And what I wanted to show you with that is this is the actual mechanism that closes the vise, and I'm sure people will ask about whether there's any jaw lift. Well, it's a fairly typical way of dealing with it. The part that does the pulling is cut away at 45 degrees, the jaw is matching, so when it goes together, I hope you can see this in the camera, I've no idea. At the same time as tightening the jaw and pulling it that way, it's also pulling it down, and it pulls it down onto the bed of the vise, locking it solid. You can also see these are the screw positions where these little spheres go. So these screw in there, and again there is a straight taper there to get good location. Flux do advise that you don't swap these around from jaw to jaw. I can't get that to go. Oh dear. There we go. So once they're in, you're encouraged to regard that as being a pair for life. I suspect they locate far better than any other system that we've got for doing soft jaws, but there you are. So To show you how you use this and a couple of examples of jaws that I actually use, we'll start off with perhaps the more interesting case, the dual station. So what happens there is the slide mechanism feeds in like that. There's an additional part when you're using it as a dual station which sits in the middle. It's just floating at the moment. I'll pick up a fixed jaw, and you can see it already has the two alignment spheres, or whatever you would call them, are there. So that's simply a little bit of fiddling usually required. There it is. For the centre position, the alignment tightening screws come through the front, and it's really nothing more than just finger tight, just to push it back against those alignments. Then you have a screw there that you can tighten it down. Now what this does is it uses that 45-degree angle, and what you're doing here, this does take a decent amount of torque, and what you're doing there is torquing this down onto the bed, so that is now firmly locked in position. So at that point I'll pick up the rear part of my jaw system. Goes on like that. Front part equally easily. The remaining screws, these are done up really just to stop it flapping around like that, and it's a little more than finger tight again. You don't even have to put them in at all, but since I'm being posh here and proper, I'll do it. So there we have our dual station vise. Now what do I use this for? This is in fact a set of jaws that I use for making one of the parts of my wireless probe. This part, to be exact, it's just a little, I don't know what you'd call it, it's where the wire feeds through from inside the case into the body of the probe. The raw material is this, it's just a half-inch Delrin rod, and I cut 12mm lengths of it, and these sit there. 1, 2, 3 and 4. And Flux thoughtfully provide standard size spacer there. So that's my setup for doing op1, and it'll make 4 of them at once. These are obviously cut to size. Once op1 is done, and that puts the threaded end on here, what I'll do is I will remove that spacer. Easier said than done. And the back part of the vise is threaded, so that the op1 part simply threads in like that. Another load of raw stock goes into this station, and I can do 4 op1s and 4 op2s in a single cycle. Compared to what I used to do to make these, this was somewhat revolutionary. Now it's a fair comment that these jaws are quite complex, they're quite large, and they're quite a lot more expensive than a number of other systems. So it's a good thing that you can actually reuse parts of them. There's big enough surface area that you can do 2 things typically with them. And I also use this same set of jaws to produce the lids of the probe. That's the finished article there. Now you'll see I have, these are talon grips. The raw material for this is 1/2-inch Delrin, and a length gets cut and it sits there. Okay, and the first op runs, and basically it cuts that shape. So you have the top of the lid is the finished item, appearing in a sort of window frame. To do the second op, I got a bit creative here. I've made myself what's effectively 2 non-marking jaws that sit in there. Then that can sit for the second op that way up, when another piece of material goes in at the front for the first op. And again I have a two-station vise making first and second ops for the lid. When it comes out, pair of snips and you have the lid. So having done that, let's switch over to a single station vise arrangement, and I'll show you how that works. So very, very easy to change. We simply loosen that screw, jaw 1 lifts off. I loosen that screw, jaw 2 lifts off. This one's a little bit tighter. If I remember rightly, it usually requires 2 or 3 rotations. We'll loosen off, as I said before, they're not tight, the alignment parts, and jaw 3 lifts off. Now for our single station arrangement, the fixed jaw is the rear one, so it's these locating positions that we use. We also don't need the bit in the middle. There we go. Take that out. See how long it takes me to get this. There we go. For this one, the tightening locations to get the alignment right are at the rear, and it's the same process, just a little more than finger tight. Number 2, and then you have the one in the centre that locks the whole thing solid, so it does get a bit more torque. Second jaw, too easy if I got this first time. Yep, and there it is. And like the 2-jaw case, I will simply put that finger tight so that it works. The other thing I should have done is they provide different lengths of the actual operating screw, and in the 2-jaw condition it's the shorter one that gets fitted, so it's not going to look very clever sitting like that with the longer one in. So what I do with this, this was the first set of jaws that I made, and it comes back to the probe again, and this is how I make the actual main case, which is this part. It starts off life as a piece of Delrin, it gets cut to length, and it sits between the talon grips like that. And the orientation of the part at that point is actually that way. So it cuts the outline. For op 2, basically what I've done is I've milled in a set of parallels here. So for op 2, it changes and it sits like that. For op 3, which is to put the little micro USB, I have a pocket machined in here in the parallel, and that's my op 3 fixture. And then finally, the last thing that has to be done is an M10 hole put there, and it sits back in the parallels again, like that. Now obviously with 2 of these vices in the dual station configuration, the thing to do would be to have the 4 stations set up with jaws machined for each one of those operations. That would be very much faster. With this particular set of jaws, it was the first ones that I actually got. I made more channels, which gives me more options for fitting the talon grips, and in fact I end up using these jaws as first op jaws for quite a lot of stuff. Anything to avoid taking the vise off the table and putting a conventional vise back on, so if it's a one-off job, quite often I will try and do it with just these jaws. I hope that gives you some idea of what the Flux vise is. I think probably the only thing I haven't actually covered here is how you attach it to the table. Now it has fairly conventional grooves along the side, it comes with a set of clamps. They are much too big for a 440, but then most things are. But also usefully on its base, there's another couple of these alignment features, which means you can machine a base plate and tap holes for a couple of these things, and then you have the choice of screws coming up from underneath into these tap positions, or they're actually holes from above. If I take this off again, well, I don't know, this is going to be very useful. But yeah, you can almost see if I turn it around, there are hole positions underneath the body which allow it to be bolted down to the base plate, again with these ingenious little steel spheres used to guarantee alignment. And the base plate I have, I actually put some 10mm steel dowels through the bottom which engage in the table's T-slots. Before I did that, I actually measured the T-slots on my table to find out how close to properly straight they were, and I was amazed. There's barely a quarter of a thou run out along the full 10 inches of travel. So the net result is I can take this vise off the table and put it back on again, and it will be within, you know, if I probe along the length of the vise, that's 6 inches. I don't think I've ever seen it worse than half a thou out at the first effort. which is good enough for most jobs. And it's pretty surprising. I didn't think I'd get it that good, but it is. So it makes a big difference being able to do that, and then having the accurate placement of the jaws. You can get to a very usable, very accurate setup much faster than any of the approaches I've used prior to this. So I hope that gives you an idea of what these little devices are for, what they're about. Obviously they're not very big, but they are very, very useful. So I hope that's interesting to you. Bye for now.